Good morning again to our September GIC meeting. We had technical difficulties, so we hope you are continuing to join us here. So I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Matt where we left off and look forward to our meeting.
Great, thanks, Madam Chair, and apologies for that. The last point I was making on the calendar is just that we would normally have that we're working with our colleagues at the Health Policy Commission and the Center for Health Information and Analysis to find the right time for them to come and present on the cost trends hearings. And so this gets us back onto the normal rhythm of having them come towards the end of the year after the release of their annual report, which was released last week. So we will likely add them before the end of the year. So with that, let's move on to the next agenda item, and for this I'll hand it over to Erica Schiavelli, our Deputy Executive Director, to report out on engagement activities. Erica?
Good morning, Commissioners. Thanks for bearing with us while we got that technical difficulty addressed. Thanks, Matt, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and Commissioners for having me this morning to update you. I'm excited to bring you up to speed with what's going on in our engagement strategy and the progress that we've made thus far. And I'd like to start just by refreshing our memories as to why we're embarking on this robust engagement strategy. So the objective here is really three-pronged, with each one being equally important. The first is to make sure that we're effectively and clearly communicating to our external stakeholders the GIC's timeline for procurement and our key areas of policy focus. The second is to garner feedback from these meetings in order to inform our strategy and draft the RFR with that feedback in mind. And the third is to build confidence in the procurement process by making it inclusive, responsive, and transparent. So moving on to the update itself. Although the Commission didn't meet in July and August, we were very busy behind the scenes executing on our engagement strategy. As you can see from this slide, we've met with a wide range of external stakeholders, and as Matt often likes to say, these initial meetings are not a one-off, rather they're a way to open up an ongoing dialogue throughout this procurement process. We'll be meeting again in some capacity with each of these stakeholders listed to update them on our progress in drafting the RFR and receiving further feedback from them. This next slide highlights meetings that we have scheduled or in the process of being scheduled, and I'd like to note two of them specifically. Our Director of Gov Affairs, Mike Berry, is working on scheduling a legislative briefing that will be open to all members of the legislature and staff. We're looking toward a November timeframe to get this on the books, and we plan to present a GIC 101 in addition to our engagement and procurement update. This is after some feedback that we've heard from many legislators wanting to make sure that we open up this process, which we absolutely took under advisement. And of course, we'll keep you updated as the scheduling for this progresses. Mike is also working to get time scheduled with a number of folks in the labor community as part of our ongoing commitment to transparency and partnership. Again, we're aiming for later this fall, and we'll certainly keep you updated. Moving on to the next slide. Engagement meetings aren't the only mechanisms that we have for feedback that we're deploying here. As you can see on this slide, we have a number of others that have either been completed, will be ongoing, or are forthcoming. Primarily, we have the member preferences survey, which closed on August 4th. This is a little bit of a teaser because we've recently received the dashboard for that data, and we plan to come back to the Commission with some of those findings at the next meeting of the Commission in October. So like I said, a little bit of a teaser here for you, but we are working on that data. We also have our annual stewardship meetings coming up this fall and are working with mass retirees to plan a virtual town hall, among other things, so that we can continue to pull feedback. So from our meetings and other engagement strategies, we've already received significant feedback. The key themes of this feedback are listed here. I won't read it all out to you, and they fall under these four main categories of alignment, affordability, PBMs, and behavioral health access. What has been most encouraging for me to hear is that there's broad agreement with our three main priorities that the GIC has decided to focus on, being affordability, behavioral health, and health equity. And there has also been a very positive reaction to our general engagement strategy and the idea of bringing our stakeholders along for this ride in procurement. So the remainder of the themes here, other than kind of the broad alignment, I'm sure won't be a surprise to anyone. And I'll pause here to see if the commissioners have any questions or if Matt had anything to add on this particular slide.
I don't see any questions from.
The only thing I would add here is that we've got a number of meetings on our calendar, even just over the next few weeks, with a variety of experts and observers of the healthcare system, including our colleagues at the Health Policy Commission and CHIA, members of their commission, members of the Connector Board, which I'm really excited about, since they're so close to what's happening in the healthcare system. I suspect that a good deal of those meetings will provide kind of a different dimension of feedback that will relate and inform the strategy development in kind of new and different ways. So I'm really looking forward to that part.
I see Toby has his hand up. Go ahead, Toby.
Yes, Erica, if you could say a few words about the PBMs. I noticed the word intense interest and increased transparency that seemed to stand out. Could you just kind of maybe give us a teaser towards the November discussion?
Sure. So the reason why it was intense interest is because it's pretty much something we've heard across all meetings that we've had. So I think that's the reason for that use of that word. Really with a focus, again, across the board on increased transparency there and making sure that folks really understand what PBMs do and why we utilize them and what the value is or is not there. So again, that's been really all across the board.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Toby, go ahead.
No, I don't have anything more. I think that I didn't know whether people really understood what they do when they were digging into the value of that, but it sounds like it's more of just educating what they do, and then people can make a decision whether they think that's something we ought to continue with or how we ought to work with them.
Well, I think that is part of it. We have heard from several audiences, particularly in the legislature, and those who are closer observers, as legislative leaders are to the system. And I would say, there was an interesting article in the State House News yesterday that indicated what has been my sense anyway, that pharmacy benefit managers are going to get a very close look in the legislature as they put together healthcare bills over the course of the next 10 months or so. So that's something we want to follow closely because it affects or could affect how we work with our PBMs. I would go so far as to say that, some have a really strong skepticism that the PBMs contribute to a high value system. And, I will note that, there's several bills in the legislature that we've reviewed. A good chunk of the pharmacy value chain has not to date been included in the framework for cost containment in the Commonwealth put together by Chapter 224 in 2012. They don't report data in the same way health plans and providers do. They don't typically participate in the cost trends hearing. So there's a good deal of interest in bringing them into the fold. I will say too, I and a number of my colleagues have been on some sessions this week sponsored by the National Association of State Health Policy. And a good deal of that was around pharmacy and PBM. So there's more to come in this space, and we want to make sure that we're following it closely.
Thank you for the update.
Yep.
Great, thanks, Matt. So my last slide is really just highlighting our next steps throughout the process. And again, throughout this process, we'll be bringing feedback to the commission about what we've been doing here. I plan to keep you informed at every single meeting, and we'll be bringing this particular feedback that we get, not just from this first round, but also from our ongoing rounds to our internal strategy team so that it can be carefully considered during the drafting process. So that's all I've got for this morning. I see there are a couple of questions.
And before we take a question, let me just build on that last point I made about PBMs. So those who follow the legislature will know that there is interest in both the House and the Senate in several pieces of legislation around healthcare, not just PBMs. The Senate has made behavioral health a top priority, and that has come up in our engagement meetings with leaders in the Senate. Doesn't seem like there's a legislative session that goes by that there's not a comprehensive healthcare bill that is in the making. One of the things that we're considering is just the timing. So if a bill like that gets through the legislature and gets to the governor's desk towards the end of the session, that will likely be a time when we already have requests for responses from both the health plans and the PBMs. So the timing will be complicated. So it's incumbent upon us, I think, to be very aware of what the legislature is doing and the implications it has for us and our procurement.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Erica. Let's hear from Bobby, and then Anna, and then Toby.
Thank you, Valerie. I don't know if this is the right spot in which to raise this issue, but this is regarding physical and occupational therapy. And those therapies are approved by a vendor that we don't contract with directly, is my understanding, AIM. And I forget what the acronym stands for right now, but it's come to my attention that people who are referred to physical therapy for various ailments or accidents, whatever, results of accidents, their requests for physical therapy are being reduced significantly. So what was historically almost an automatic 10-day or 10-session approval for PT has now been reduced to 4 or 6. And then people are not, they're denying renewals of those sessions. And our members are sort of forced to appeal. And I know that you're looking into that, but I want to raise that with the commissioners because I don't know if other commissioners are hearing the same thing from their constituents, but it's sort of worrisome to me. And so I don't know whether it's a result of new contracts between the carriers and AIM or exactly what's going on and what's the reason for that.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kaplan. I'll speak to that briefly. So this, this was brought to our attention by you and others, so thank you for that. I will note that I believe the question that's been raised relates to one specific of our carriers that contracts with AIM, may not relate to other carriers and how they manage this benefit. This, as in many areas, there's some variation in the way our carriers approach this benefit. So we are looking into that to understand it. Actually, we're working on that right now. So we can certainly circle back with you, Commissioner Kaplan, and maybe put a blurb in our director's report for a coming meeting if there's a desire for further discussion.
Thank you.
I think I'm next. So I wanted to thank you, first of all, for this great update on the engagement that's ongoing, and also just to say how excited I am for the conjoint analysis results that are coming. So really happy to hear about that work. And then I think my one question or comment is just related to member engagement, because I can see there's a lot of plans to meet with sort of the representatives of different member groups, but it's really just a request that as you guys continue your work, it would be really great to hear plans for direct member engagement, education perhaps, thoughts about how to work with members through this next year, and look forward to hearing about that and discuss the different strategies with you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Commissioner. Let me just say a couple of brief things on that. One, as commissioners may know, the conjoint survey was for our members in the active plans, but not the retiree plans. And that's really a function of the wider range of flexibility that we have to design the plans for active members, whereas Medicare plans are largely, there's a lot less flexibility. So we've had some really productive conversations, as Eric alluded to, with mass retirees on how to essentially replace that engagement tool with retirees. We'll be doing the teletown hall, but we've got some other strategies that we're developing jointly with mass retirees. We have, as part of our conversations with labor leaders, also opened up the possibility of engaging with members of those labor groups, again, working in partnership with the leadership of those groups. And there was one other thing I wanted to say about this. We have, as we always have, our listening sessions at the early part of calendar 22, which we typically use as part of a rate development and plan design process. But we're going to be thinking about how to do that a little differently this year and use that also as an opportunity to engage with our members. Doing it virtually last year made that process enormously more engaging and back and forth. And we reached a much wider audience than we have in the past with in-person meetings. So I think you'll see a more robust strategy for engagement that we can use those sessions for. So we are all ears for other ways in which members think we can engage with our membership. I will note briefly that, as Erica alluded to earlier, we'll be doing an all legislature briefing on the GIC. That will also include a dedicated session for members of the legislature, and in particular their staff, just as members of the GIC, leaving aside sort of policy and strategy for the work that we do, but it's an opportunity to engage with them as GIC members. So there's a lot more we can do here, and those are some of the things that we've been thinking about to date.
I think I was the remaining person. Matt, just building on what Anna said, I think it's great with especially the member engagement. I think another area to give a little bit of thought to as you go forward, because I know you put a tremendous amount of effort into it, is how we can get more return out of the open enrollment. The health fairs and all that. And I think we can kind of take it to the next level. Obviously we got to define what that means and so forth in the future, but just to kind of put that on your list, please.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Toby. I think coming out of COVID, God willing, we'll be in a better position in the spring to be able to do something more than we were limited to last year as it relates to benefit fairs. But those are always a really good opportunity to work with our members on specific enrollment things. But I think there's a good opportunity to do more. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Our Vice Chair has a question.
Yes, thank you. I was just curious when this legislative briefing was going to occur and whether they requested it, the members of the legislature, or that was something that GIC has initiated.
That's a great question. So as I mentioned, we're looking toward November to get that scheduled. And it's really a combination of feedback from the legislators themselves suggesting that that would be a good idea on the procurement itself. But we had already been internally working on getting together a GIC 101 briefing. So what this is going to end up being is really kind of a combination of those two things, combining the feedback from our colleagues in the legislature and kind of our own internal working to continue to cultivate relationships with the legislature and staff.
Right. I think that's terrific because I like the idea that they would be engaging on a different level, right, other than just policy.
Right.
And I think it's important for them to, sort of, it's a reminder that they are also members, I think. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we're thinking about it sort of as an open house of sorts. We may or may not be in a position to do it in person, so that may be a challenge. But I also think, as Erica noted, this is not a one and done engagement. It's not an event, it's a process. So we'll be looking for other opportunities to do that.
Jane has a question, and then we'll have to move on from this topic.
I just wanted to say how exciting it is to see this level of strategic engagement. It just seems like it's so much more robust than I can ever remember it here at the GIC. So, congratulations on that. I just wonder, as it pertains to retirees, would you say that there were any particular barriers that you see to that engagement strategy? I mean, are there things that stand out that you're still dealing? I love the point that you've made that this is a process and that you're constantly, I'm sure, looking for additional ways to bolster this already fine effort. But I was just curious.
Yeah.
So what we've done.
Go ahead, Erica.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
What we've done is we've worked with mass retirees directly as they know their constituency best and can help us navigate those barriers. So we're working with them, like I said, directly. They'll be hosting the teletown hall, and we'll kind of be the guest cameo, if you will, so that they can best get to their members.
That's great. Thank you so much.
So as we close this, unless there's further comments, I just want to thank Erica, Mike Berry, and Tansy Helmke, who have spearheaded this and worked on a lot of the kind of details and the logistics and scheduling to get these on the books. It's a really exciting part of the work. It's also a really enjoyable part of the work. So thank you.
Yeah, terrific work.
All right, so thank you for that. So we'll move on to the second of three items on our agenda, or three kind of main items on the agenda, with a specialty drug overview. I'm going to hand it over to Devin Shaw, the pharmacy wizard of Willis Towers Watson, for this deeper dive. So in some respects, this is a follow-on to a presentation we made at our June meeting that was more general about prescription drugs. There was a desire on the commission to do a little bit of a deeper dive here. So bear with us. I think there's a lot of specificity in here. Some of the slides, I think, warrant some real thought and analysis. So please, if you have follow-ups to any of these, please let us know. Devin has a tremendous amount of experience in this area and is somebody that we rely on quite a bit as we seek to understand the challenges here. So with that, I'll hand it over to Devin Shaw.
Thanks, Matt, and good morning, commissioners. So when we had met last time in May, we spent a little bit of time talking about the PBM vendors, specifically ESI and CVS, that GIC engages with. We also spent a little bit of time talking about, what relates to drug cost trends and what are the different components. part of the discussion is we had defined what different types of drugs are. So we talked about what a generic drug is, what a brand name drug is, and we had introduced the notion of what a specialty drug is. So for today's agenda, we will sort of pick up right there. We'll start with what a specialty drug is, talk about the landscape, and go over some of the things that we're seeing in the data and where where this particular team is focused in terms of mitigating trend with the focus on outcomes as much as we can. So with that, if we can flip over to the next page, we will start with the definition of specialty drugs. And before I sort of get into what a specialty drug is, I would just want to be very clear. This is a very loosely defined term in the industry. So unlike generics and brands, which have sort of a regulatory basis in how they were approved through the federal legislations, there is nothing called specialty drugs out there. There are biotech drugs, there are biologicals, there are biosimilars, there's brands, generics. But specialty seems to be a definition that is sort of a combination of things, and depending on who you're talking to, it may mean different things to different people. For our discussion today, we're going to talk about specialty drugs as those that have the following characteristics. They may have some or all of them. Most of these drugs are things that need special handling. So they have to be refrigerated. COVID vaccine, for example, comes to mind, or you have to keep it frozen for a certain time, and it's only good for X amount of hours after you take it out of the freezer. So all those things sort of go into specialty drugs. High cost, Medicare defines it as any drug that costs more than $670 a month. Rare conditions, complex conditions. So these are conditions that I've listed here. And again, as you'll see, these are not your high prevalent conditions like diabetes and blood pressure, although lately we're hearing about specialty drugs sort of weaving their way into the high prevalent conditions. Oftentimes, these drugs require prior authorization or some sort of a clinical review because the indication is very narrow. So the FDA may approve a drug that is highly defined to a certain genotype or a certain subpopulation of people that have a condition. So in order to make sure that the right people are benefiting from the treatment, there are protocols in place. Sometimes the PBM will do it. Sometimes the FDA would require the manufacturers to do it, but they're often accompanied with prior authorization. They have restricted distribution. A lot of that is because, again, the FDA may sometimes require the manufacturers to collect post-marketing data. They want to see specifics on how the drugs are being used. And in general, when the distribution is channeled through a given pharmacy or mail order, what have you, you have better handle on the people that are taking these drugs. So all this sort of defines what a specialty drug is. And again, as I mentioned before, PBM to PBM or health plan, these drug lists are not always the same. They may have like a 99% overlap, but there are subtle differences amongst the lists. To the graphic at the bottom, I think this sort of, to me, tells the story. So on the left-hand side, you've got your fiscal year 21 spend in specialty drugs. And now, mind you, this is only PBM data. This does not include health plan data. What this clearly shows you is the amount of money being spent on specialty versus the non-specialty drugs. So just last year, we spent $478 million in specialty. Compare that to $364 million in non-specialty. I would argue that the number is a lot higher than $478 million if you add up all the specialty spent in the health plan carriers. But because that was out of scope in this particular graphic, I want you to think of this as this is the baseline, and there is definitely more than $478 million being spent on drugs, and that accounts for roughly 57% of your total drug spend. If you go to the next slide, and this sort of this couples into what I just said. So the two trend lines I'm showing here, the yellow line talks about the non-specialty drugs, and the purple line above, or the blue line, however you see it, is the specialty trend. Over the last 2 years, the non-specialty drugs have trended 2.75% per year. That is consistent with what we're seeing with cost of living, other types of trends, but not the same for specialty. Specialty has trended at 15.5% per year over the last 2 years, and that has continued for the last almost decade, and is expected to continue going forward. So if there is something to focus on, for this particular team here, we stay laser focused on specialty drugs, and we'll sort of get into the dynamics of, what we focus on, how we focus on things, and what are some of the good and the bad things we need to consider going forward. If we flip to the next slide, we took the liberty of breaking down specialty trends in separate components. So the graphic on the top talks about your commercial specialty trend, and the one at the bottom talks about Medicare specialty trend. The bar on the left compares trend from fiscal year 19 to 20, and the bar on the right compares fiscal year trend from 20 to 21. No matter how you look at this, no matter what population you look at this, the story is pretty much the same. The story is not around unit costs. Unit costs are trending 4 to 6% every year, which is sort of consistent with what we've seen in the pharma industry. It's the utilization that drives a lot of these trends. And again, this should come as no surprise, because this is the space where pharma is innovating. We have seen a lot more approvals and a lot more treatments come out to treat rare and difficult to treat conditions. There's a lot more disease awareness campaigns, whether you look at TV ads, radio ads, just out in the social media population. So there's a lot more awareness coming out. And there's also improvement and significant improvement in diagnostic tools, which allows our providers to then go out there, identify members earlier on in the game, and have an intervention that can have a potential impact to their life and the quality of life. The third box at the bottom is also very interesting and more academic than others would think, but we call that the drug mix. And that is defined as somebody who is moving from one treatment to an improved treatment, or increases the intensity of treatment, or moves to a different drug which has better safety and efficacy. Now, that is not increasing utilization. Neither of that is increasing unit cost. It is just the shift that we're seeing in people's consumption of drugs. And that, as you can see, that accounts for almost a third of the trend every single year. Now, in terms of plan design, in terms of utilization, if you actually look at the value that the newer drugs provide, the newer treatments provide, and you talk to the members and you talk to the providers, there's a lot of value in it. I mean, when you are taking, when you're injecting yourself once a month and you have to deal with 2 or 3 days of side effects every month, if a new formulation can reduce that to a day or half a day, that could mean the difference between, taking your kid to soccer, having productivity days at work, and everything else that goes with it. So in my opinion, when you see increase in utilization and drug mix, as long as it's appropriate, it's not necessarily a bad thing from population health perspective. Next slide is something that we had talked about in the past, and I'll sort of repeat that. We're talking about the key drivers of specialty drugs. I'm not going to sort of go through every single piece of this, but understand, I'll start from the bottom up. There is this pipeline that keeps growing. We're seeing delayed entry of biosimilars, which has a significant sort of unit cost impact on the available products. And we've seen extended patent protection. From a pharma perspective, the argument is, hey, we're trying to come out with cure for some of these very rare and complex diseases. There are fewer patients, so that leads to expensive research and development costs. More and more treatments are now being coupled with lab testing, REMS requirements, which is post-marketing tracking for outcomes. And that also adds to the cost equation. And finally, the generic pathway seems to be non-existent for the specialty drugs or the biotech drugs. On the next slide.
Pause for just a second there, Devin. I see that Commissioner Edmonds has her hand up. Oh, no, okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Slide 18 is again a graphic of what we are anticipating in the pipeline. So on the left-hand side, you'll see sort of the annual cost impact of what I call chronic therapies. These are treatments that have to be administered on a regular basis to treat a condition, versus on the right-hand side are therapies that are called a one-time treatment, right? So think about this as, hey, here is a treatment for genetic blindness, Luxturna. I take 1 shot, 2 shots, and I'm treated. Versus when you look at something like Solaris or Exondys on the left-hand side, these are treatments you go in on a quarterly basis, on a biannual basis, but it's sort of there to stay. The point over here is if you look at the x-axis in both these charts, these are treatments that don't come cheap. These are expensive treatments, and I would argue that people need these treatments today. Outside of this, and some of these people really have a very poor quality of life and very high mortality rates for these conditions. So these are the treatments that we will continue to sort of fund through the GIC in the next few years. Next slide, please. So here is now very specific data around GIC, and I'll start with the graphic at the bottom, if you don't mind. So if you look at your membership, so you follow from left to right, you've got 427,000 members that account for roughly $841 million. So that's sort of the equation between the left and the right graphic. Then you distill this down to specialty users. You've got 11,000 members that account for $477 million. That's at 57% of specialty drug spend I talked about. You bring it one level deeper, and for the top 3 conditions alone, the ones that I show on the top, you've got 5,000 members. That is 1.2% of the population that accounts for $355 million of spend, which is 42% of drug spend. So that is where we feel that this is not low-hanging fruit by any chance. I don't want people to walk away thinking, oh yeah, we know the 3 conditions of drugs, and we'll have a magic pill for this. We do not have a magic pill for this. This is reality. This is what we're seeing consistently from payer to payer, that the top 3 conditions, and most of these are rare conditions and not the high prevalent conditions, will account for a huge sum of drug spend. Next slide, please. So these are the top 10 drugs, and this is your commercial population. Your Medicare population isn't that different, but there's a couple of things I want to sort of call out on this slide. One is if you look at the third column, the one in the middle that says indication. A lot of this is around inflammatory conditions, cancer, cystic fibrosis makes an inroad in there, HIV is in there, but for the most part, it's inflammatory conditions and cancer. And Humira shows up as in 2 different lines, line number 1 and line number 5. The difference being that line number 1 is a newer formulation of Humira. And we'll sort of do a little bit of deep dive in Humira in the future slides. But the point is, a lot of inflammatory conditions, and then on the second column on the right, you'll see what is the average plan cost per claim. Revlimid is a little bit more expensive, but again, it's not used as chronically as we see usage of things like Humira, Stelara, and Enbrel. All right, so let's do a little bit of a deeper dive on the top 3 conditions.
Hey, Devin,
Yeah.
on this slide, just on this section, just for the sake of time, maybe we can just focus on one of the three specific conditions. And I think given your prior comments, inflammatory conditions feels like the right one to spend on, and the other two slides, commissioners can review it on their time.
Absolutely, Matt, we can do that.
Thanks.
So inflammatory conditions, this continues to be sort of the top condition by spend for almost going back almost 7-8 years now. There are more than 100 inflammatory conditions. Some of the common ones you may have heard of are rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, ulcerative colitis. The numbers, we're talking about 23.5 million Americans have inflammatory condition, which is more than cancer or heart disease. And this has been the top condition for the GIC for the past 3 years, accounts for more than a third of the total drug spend. And before we get into what the GIC is doing today to sort of address the condition and the drugs, let's talk about Humira. So on the right-hand side, I have some statistics on Humira. It's a top-selling drug for almost a decade now, had about $16 billion in sales last year. It was originally approved in 2002, so 20 years ago, it was approved for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis. And over the past 20 years, it has now more than 9 indications, and the list keeps growing and growing and growing. The good news on this is we're expecting multiple biosimilars in next year or the year after next, 2023. And this may shape up as a very competitive arena for contracting, but for now, at least for 2021, 2022, and I would say even 2023, we would still expect to see Humira and inflammatory conditions to be on top of the list there. So let's talk a little bit about what the GIC is doing in terms of managing cost. If you can go back to that slide, the inflammatory conditions slide. So first and foremost, making sure that we have strong contracts with the PBMs to control unit costs, which we do. Secondly, making sure we have a formulary that not only looks at just the unit cost of the drugs, but it's looking at the value that these drugs provide. Yes, these are expensive drugs, and there could be up to 10 or 15% cost difference between drugs, but then we also want to provide access to drugs that have broader acceptance in the community, and making sure that we're also looking at outcomes on the same path. Third, we're looking at medical necessity, making sure that the drugs are being used for the right reasons, for the right amount of time. And then finally, we're making sure that we are using facilities like the specialty pharmacy that is able to provide better engagement with our members. So these are all sort of the main key levers. And again, this is something that we review on an annual basis, making sure we have the right policies and structure in place so we can extract the most out of these drugs and conditions. If you can move up to a couple of slides, let's skip oncology and multiple sclerosis. And if you have any questions about any of those, certainly let me know. I'll even skip this in the interest of time, but I do want to spend time on slide 25.
Just pause for a moment, Devin. Our Vice Chair Kaplan has a question.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Matt. Devin, I'm very curious. Humira is heavily advertised, right? And so I'm very curious how that relates to the cost of the drug, because where do those dollars for advertising and marketing and what have you, and you see it, if you watch CNN, it's on every other, it's like on like every 10 minutes, there's an ad for Humira. And I'm very curious how that plays into the cost of the drug.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Vice Commissioner. So what I would say is the pharmaceutical industry is a master of knowing their customers. They do a very good job in understanding who their current customers are, who their potential clients are, and they know exactly how to market their products. So they, and a lot of this results in higher utilization. As people watch CNN or evening news, they know the demographics of the people watching certain channels. So you won't see a commercial for Humira on a sports network. Typically, you won't. so they know their sort of clientele, and that's why we see the higher utilization that we have seen in the trends. Because all of a sudden, people are sitting and watching this. They're like, I mean, maybe I have a such and such symptom, or maybe next time I go see my doctor, I will ask them about what inflammatory conditions are and see if I have a familial disposition to any one of these, or if I know a family member who was recently diagnosed. Could I be one of those? So all that sort of plays into this. I don't think it plays into the cost as much, but it definitely plays into the utilization piece. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I want to end with all the different levers that that I talked about with the inflammatory conditions. Again, we try to bucket them, and this is a very simplistic visual of how we bucket them. We have a whole different algorithm of doing this, but we look at the financial. These are all the things that we have reviewed for the GIC, and where you see the green check marks are the ones that we currently have deployed, and we monitor them on a regular basis. The ones in the red check marks are things that we have reviewed, and for whatever reason, we have decided not to pursue that lever. Site of care redirection, for example, I'll sort of bring that up. When we looked at site of care redirection, and we got the data and we started looking at the types of drugs being used within medical, within pharmacy, we felt like while there may be some value in shifting some drugs, it would be significantly burdensome to both the members and the providers to comply with a very stringent plan like that. So we try to sort of do this as voluntarily as possible, the soft nudges, but we haven't taken the approach of, hey, for this particular drug, you have to use this benefit or the other. But the point is, this list continues to grow, and I think the support from this team has been tremendous, and we hope to sort of keep coming back to you with other ideas and concepts that are catching on with specialty management. So I'll end with the next slide. In terms of the key takeaways, again, I want everyone to sort of walk away knowing what specialty drugs are and why they're important for us to sort of manage. What are some of the things that we're doing in terms of managing specialty drugs today? And finally, last but not the least, the most important, in my opinion, are what are the key considerations that we are guiding principles in terms of how do we manage specialty drugs? It literally comes down to better health outcomes, member impact, plan costs, and access to care. So these are absolutely critical for us to keep in mind before we do anything around specialty drugs. And that's kind of where I would like to end. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I'm open to take questions now or even later.
Yeah, we could do a couple of questions if folks have them. I will, as folks gather their thoughts on this. As I look at that list of key considerations on the right-hand side of the slide, it strikes me how all of those considerations are very much intertwined, right? The cost of these therapies very much impacts our access to those drugs for our members, steps that plan sponsors take to address those costs and provide access can often have a substantial member impact. And ultimately what we want is at the top of the line here is to have good health outcomes on the part of our members. I will say this is a complex, very dynamic market, which makes it sometimes a challenge as we develop our strategies to balance all those key considerations. I think those who follow developments on Capitol Hill know that there's a great deal of current debate going on actually as we speak on how to strike that right balance. Again, we've been on sessions with the National Association of Health Policy, where there's a great deal of innovation happening at the state level to address those issues. Here in Massachusetts, we have some unique features put in place in law over the last couple of years that relate specifically to Mass Health Medicaid, which are kind of interesting tools to contemplate using differently. And the Health Policy Commission is working on a publication dedicated to prescription drugs a little bit later on this year, and they've had a call out on prescription drugs in their annual report released last year. So there's a lot going on in this space. It's fascinating, intriguing. It's at times mind-numbingly complex as we sort through that to figure out how we're gonna balance all those key considerations. So with that, I'll pause if there are questions.
I don't see any questions or hand raises from our commissioners. If we we're good on time, so thank you, Devin, for yet another insightful presentation on pharmacy. We really appreciate your deep expertise. I also want to echo what Matt said in terms of considerations. For me, the number one concern I have is members getting access to these drugs and ensuring that they're getting value, we're getting value for the cost that we are incurring. And I want to go back to your last slide, Devin, if you wouldn't mind. So I just wanted to make sure that you shared some of the cost indicators here that we talk about do not involve our rebates. So when you look at cost drivers for us, it's hard to incorporate the rebates because of timing. But to Bobby Kaplan's earlier question, is there some consideration or evaluation that the reason why Humira is our number one drug in this area is that we have provided the best price or the best rebating on that? Or am I making too much of a connection with your data?
Yeah, so I mean, rebates certainly play a big role into drug pricing. I wouldn't say Humira is number one because it provides the highest rebates. No, I think there's a reason Humira is won globally 10 years in a row. I mean, that product is very well adopted. Providers like it, members see significantly better outcomes from the drug. I would put Humira's rebate strategy to be middle of the line, okay. But they have widespread acceptance in the marketplace.
Okay, thanks. Well, as always, I love these presentations on the data, and thrilled again to have the opportunity to have Devin present to us. So thank you. I don't see any questions, so we can move on.
Thank you, Devin.
Thank you.
Appreciate the flexibility, Devin.
So before we move on to the next item, you'll note just as we're clicking through some slides, there are some additional informational slides for members there under the specialty drug appendix that you can review at your leisure. I do want to thank my commission for bearing with us as we've taken these deep dives throughout the last several meetings. I do hope that it broadens and deepens your understanding of the core challenges that we face as we head into the procurement. And as part of that switching gears in our work with the commission, I want to hand it over to Margaret Anschutz, Manager of Healthcare Analytics, who we've asked to sort of take a look back at all these learning modules that we've had over the last several meetings and to distill some really important takeaways. So I'll hand it over to Margaret. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and good morning, commissioners. Next slide, please. Great. All right. So what I am presenting, as Matt said, is I think of this as a sort of a cheat sheet to what have we taught you? What have we hoped to put before you with respect to the healthcare market and the market context in which we're operating? What are the problems we're really focused on and trying to solve for, both in terms of our strategic priorities, that being affordability, health equity, and behavioral health, as well as what are we looking at in the next procurement and what are we trying to solve for? So as I said, this is a sort of a cheat sheet. There have been, excuse me, 4 presentations in 2020 that have covered, or in 2021 that have covered these 3 strategic priorities. First, affordability. It's the prices, it's the prices, it's the prices. If there's one thing you take away, it's in the medical market, there is a tremendous amount of variation in what doctors are paid for services. With inpatient care in Massachusetts, there's a 2-fold variation across inpatient care. And that these price variations, they don't relate to quality. I showed you a slide that showed patient safety data across the 3 tiers of priced hospital inpatient services. And they're very weakly correlated with that safety and quality data. Furthermore, underscoring that it's the prices message, that means it's not utilization. So what we've seen consistently in the data over the last several years is that the healthcare inflation is driven by prices, not utilization, with utilization accounting for about 3% of the increase in trend, and with prices accounting for about 15% of the increase. So really the focus is on prices. Moving to our health equity priority, you saw a presentation from me about our approach to eliminating health disparities in our population. When we talk about health disparities, what we're focusing on both at Massachusetts and at the GIC is really we're focusing on racism and the disparities we know exist by race ethnicity. Really, our first step here is getting the data. We need to measure what these disparities look like, and then from there, we go to evidence-based interventions to eliminate those disparities. If there's one takeaway that I want you to know we're driving towards, it's operationalizing this health equity priority. And this will just be a regular part of what we're reporting on and what we're pushing our health system partners to focus on. Moving to behavioral health. We know that demand has been very high for behavioral health services, and access is not where it should be. One perhaps silver lining coming out of COVID is that the move to telehealth has really opened up services for a number of people who weren't able to access it, things like therapy before. That's obviously not a solution across the behavioral health continuum, where there are still large gaps that don't really lend themselves to telehealth, but it is good to see that our members are able to access more therapy services. We are also working very closely to align with efforts at our Executive Office of Health and Human Services, who are leading the efforts in Massachusetts to really provide more access and to fill in the gaps in the treatment spectrums for both mental health and substance use disorder services. So we are working very closely in our strategy to align with EHSs. This includes, a front door policy where there is one centralized number that across Massachusetts people can call to get plugged into the services they need. And also specifically at the GIC, we're focusing on what are our benefits, what do they need to be to really provide maximum access, and then just closely monitoring what utilization looks like and always working to improve this benefit. Next slide. Okay, I will be very brief here since you just heard an excellent presentation from Devin regarding specialty drugs. A couple of points I wanted to pull out. One is that 57% of the drug spend is attributable to specialty drugs, and that's driven by 3% of our members. So that really gives you a sense of the magnitude of what these drugs are costing. Having said that, I really also want to underscore that there is dramatic value in terms of life expectancy and quality of life that these drugs offer. And again, as Devin underscored, there's a lot of development right now in the pharmaceutical market focused on specialty drugs. And so we expect to see these trends continue. And with that, I'll turn it over back to Matt.
So yes, thank you, Margaret, for that. I hope this is helpful to you. As Margaret said, as a cheat sheet, I will just make one point, and I see our vice chair has a question. As we contemplate strategies to address all these challenges, we have a variety of tools to do that. And I think we've talked to the commission about that before. As we develop the procurement strategy over the coming months, that is certainly a significant tool that we can use here, but it's not the only tool. Some measures that will come out of these, some steps that we will take that come out of these findings, we will bake into the procurement. In some cases, we're leaving room in the procurement for other steps that we can take over time. In other cases, we can use our year-to-year changes to plan design, as we did for our current fiscal year with those 3 no-cost in-network behavioral health telehealth visits. So I would note that as we go through our plan design changes in the coming months for fiscal year 23, we're likely to make some proposals as well. So we're using all the tools at our disposal as we build this strategy to address these challenges. So I'll stop there. Hand it back to you, Madam Chair. I see the Vice Chair has a question.
Yes, thank you. I have a question regarding the behavioral health and Mass for You, our EAP program. So I'm very curious whether there's been an uptick, let's say, in behavioral health utilization, because more people are contacting Mass for You and becoming and receiving services, because Mass for You is very helpful in that arena, or is it just that people are trying to contact through their provider or something? I was just curious if we had any data, because there was a lot of people previously were not using Mass for You. So I'm very curious if there's been an uptick in that.
So I'll hand it over to Margaret in a minute, but let me just say a couple things there. One is that we actually have a meeting tomorrow with our EAP vendor to review their performance for the last fiscal year. So we will have more data soon. I will say, number 2, that the data that I've seen to date does not suggest that the EAP has been the resource that most of our members have turned to for these types of services, but rather the behavioral health benefit that's part of their health plan, and accessing, network clinicians to meet their needs. And as I think we've said before, telehealth has been really a godsend in that space. And it is the area where we see the most persistence of use of telehealth to obtain services when you compare it to primary care and other outpatient services. With that, if Margaret or Jim or anyone on Jim's team has more to say about that. One other thing to note is that our EAP contract is also up. So we will have a separate procurement for the EAP program outside of the health benefit. But as we're developing a strategy for the health benefit, we want to develop our strategy for EAP sort of aligned with that. We want the EAP to add value, not to duplicate value. So I'll leave it there and see if others have anything else they want to add.
Yeah, Matt, thanks. I think that that's right. The point is here that people have been accessing their behavioral health benefits through the carriers, not EAP, to my knowledge. As a teaser, at the next month's meeting, we're going to have some data related to behavioral health access during COVID, and you'll see a dramatic shift to telehealth services as well as that increase. So yes, it's through the carriers.
Hey, Margaret, when you, if at all possible, when you present us data on EAP, if you could look at from the inception of EAP, how many members utilize EAP, what's our total cost on what we spend each year on EAP, and then, how does that look from the inception? I think it would be interesting to see, what has been the value to our constituents, even if it's a small number, since we put in place an EAP. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And I will say that we are working with others in state government who have an interest in the EAP, providing value to our members. So we won't be developing our strategies there in a vacuum. Others of our partners have a good deal of interest as well.
Thanks.
So with that, we will turn to our last agenda item by handing it over to Jim Rust, our Chief Financial Officer, for the standard typical CFO update. Jim? You may be on mute, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, thank you. So here we show in the first slide our medical claims. Again, we've been tracking this since COVID came into place. You can see there's a lot of noise here, but there's a blue trend line there that in generally medical claims continue to rise as we kind of come out of COVID, but they're rising at a decreasing rate, if that makes sense, probably through the Delta variant and some other things that have happened recently. So we're keeping an eye on this, but despite all the noise, we are seeing an increase in claims. Next slide, please. This is the COVID claims paid by month. This is also interesting in a way because you can see at the most recent part of the graph in August that we're starting to see an uptick in COVID claims. And since there is a lag, maybe a 3 to 6 week lag, we may see the impact of the last surge in COVID cases and the Delta variant surge over the next few months. So again, this is mostly informational, but it does seem to track the pattern that we've all been seeing in COVID cases across the state. Next slide, please. So the next two slides we can go through quickly. This is just informational, what we've paid the various vendors for the year. This is a full year snapshot since this is the end of the fiscal 21 year report. So this is the state share or the employer share. And you can see, if you look at the bottom line, that the levels, again, are starting to return to pre-COVID levels towards the end of the year. Next slide, please. The next slide is the enrollee share. And as we would expect, it's a mirror image of the state share due to the split. And next slide, please. So this is the whole year. The whole year's set of claims, budgeted versus actual. As you can see, the shape was actually pretty close to what we expected, but the overall level of paid claims kind of lagged the projection over the course of the year. And I think a lot of that is, one, it was a difficult year to project way back last summer when we started projecting it, and two, COVID was more persistent than we expected. So I think a lot of care was still deferred and a little less traffic at various places for care. So that's shown in paid claims. Next slide, please. This is the cumulative budget. So this budget shows the actual for the whole year, actual to budget for the whole year. And as you can see, there's some space between the lines. Those who've been here for a while know that generally these two things are right on top of each other. So this will preview where we are when we look at the numbers on the final slide. Next slide, please. And here's where we ended up for the year. So we ended up $100 million under budget for the year, which was where we've been tracking for several months. So this isn't a surprise. Again, mostly this is almost entirely due to lower utilization. Unit prices continue to be what they are, and we've seen anecdotally from our carriers that they continue to increase. So this is almost 100% utilization. We've also packed, which is a budget term of moving money from this year into next year for deferred care. So 60 million of this budget has been moved to next year to help pay for what we anticipate will be deferred care into the next year for care that wasn't given during this year. So we did a similar thing last year through the COVID situation. So that's a little bit of an unusual situation for us, but mostly driven by the COVID situation. And with that, I have to say I can't hear anybody, so I know you can hear me, but I'm gonna try.
Jim, Bobby has her hand up. Yeah. So we can't hear you, Jim, but we see your lips move. Go ahead, Bobby, ask the question.
Okay, I was waiting for, Jim's audio to return. The 60 million that has been transferred to next year, does that reduce what we have asked for from? No, this is going to be additional. This is on top of what we have requested from the legislature. Is that correct?
That's correct, Bobby. That's right. It's in addition to our regular appropriation for this year, so it'll be on top.
And
so
it's
appropriation is the same as it would have been.
Okay, and it's specifically designated for the deferred care. Is that right?
We can't designate every dollar, but right, it's designated. That's why they packed, right? So we'll track. We can't track deferred care, right? We anticipate we'll have more claims than we would have otherwise because of deferred care, and this money is to cover that expected increase in claims. When we look back and through the data warehouse, we might be able to see what was kind of deferred care and what wasn't if we do that kind of analysis. But this is to cover what we expect to be an increased cost for deferred claims.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Matt, I don't see anybody else's hand up. I have a quick question for Jim. Do you know what percent of the claims, so you've got a lot of numbers on these slides, what percent of our total claims does COVID related claims kind of direct towards? Just a swag. Is it 5%? Is it 20%?
I think he's doing his quick math.
I know, I can see his.
So that is while he's doing that, that is a slide 35 that shows the COVID update, $215 million directly attributed to COVID is a significant number. So he can give us the.
I unfortunately didn't do this by year, but it looks to be maybe up to 10%, something to that effect.
Yeah,
sounds about right.
That's helpful to know and for us to keep in mind when we are talking to legislatures about, the amount of money we'll need to make sure that our constituents are well taken care of.
One other thing I'd just add is while we, as Jim noted, have come in $100 million less than our budgeted projection for the year, that is still an increase and not an insubstantial increase of our spend over the prior year, which I think we might, I'll go back with my team and think about a way that we might be able to add that to our presentations here, but I think it's an important thing to note. We're under budget, but even due to COVID, our year-over-year spend continues to increase.
Yeah.
Did I have that right, Jim? Sorry, I'm sort of freewheeling it on this topic, but I think that is accurate. Yeah, he's nodding.
But we have 2 years of COVID experience now, so it's not all. Yeah, 1 year was bisected by COVID, and this year is. But,
right. All right. Thank you, Jim. If there are no further questions, I think we can wrap up the business of this meeting. I do just want to note on slide 41 and then on slide 42 about our future commission meetings. We did note that the prior meeting calendar that we had presented to you all had an April meeting that was right in the middle of Passover. So what we would suggest is to move the April meeting. If you can move to slide 42, we've moved the April 2022 meeting in the upper right. We normally meet the third Thursday of April. That would be the 21st. We're suggesting moving that to the 14th. That makes it Holy Thursday. So, but I do want to just note that, and if there are any thoughts or suggestions, whether it's simply to support what we're doing here or something else, we'd be interested to hear.
All right, thanks, Matt. Do you want to go back to slide 41 to conclude the other business?
Sure. I think there's much other business here other than to note that our meetings will continue to be held remote till further notice. I think we're all eager to reconvene in person at the appropriate future moment. And I'll say what I've said in prior meetings, which is that I believe, and I suspect others share this belief, that that the ability to have remote participation for commissioners and for those members of the public is a real added value to all of us. And we'll be looking for opportunities to incorporate that into how we approach the commission meetings going forward. I suppose it's worth asking if there's any other business, new business that commissioners would like to raise. Otherwise, I think we can wrap. I think Bobby has her hand up, but that may be simply from her prior comment. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, Madam Chair, that concludes our business. I hand it back over to you.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us with the technical difficulties. I do want to thank all the presenters today. Very good presentations, packed a punch in a good amount of time. So much appreciation. I want to make sure that we are, as commissioners, all, and I'm pretty sure that we are aligned with the staff's RFP, the procurement process. That means that, in the new year, in 2022, that we will be going out to, we get bids for our health plans and our PBMs. And so those commissioners who do have constituencies, whether it be on the municipalities or on the unions, if there can be extra effort talking through to your constituents on this is happening and the good work that our staff are doing to ensure that engagement is as thorough as possible, education and awareness is as thorough as possible, it's much appreciated, because this is the work that the team has been doing to prepare for the upcoming procurement. So I thank you all for participating. And as chair, I am concluding this meeting. So we'll see you in October.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. It was a great meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.